Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in China to discuss a potential free trade deal, but apparently talks are not going that well. A joint news conference was cancelled and Canadian media were actually blocked for a short period of time. One of our BCN contributors, Brian Lilley, is in Ottawa and he joins me right now. Brian, what happened exactly?
Well, I just wish I was in Beijing for this. I've never had a huge desire to travel to China, other parts of Asia, but China leaves me a little bit wary given their human rights record. But, it would have been fascinating to see. The Prime Minister and his team talked this up as if we're going to China and we're going to get a free trade deal. We're going to start free trade talks with China. Navdeep Bains, the Science and Innovation Minister, was even bragging about that in an interview just before he got on the plane and took off to China. And yet, Justin Trudeau shows up, and that doesn't quite happen. In fact, they even canceled a joint news conference. As you mentioned, journalists from Canada were blocked from. There's a great photo out there of just a hand up in front of the camera. I mean, it's blocking. And the only thing that they're blocking are Justin Trudeau and Li Keqiang, the Chinese Prime Minister. I think I've got his name correct, shaking hands. But this is China, and we're dealing with a basic dictatorship. And this is something that Justin Trudeau's expressed admiration for before. I don't think he is at the moment. They talked about this, and instead he didn't get what he went for. Now, they're trying to say it's not because of the progressive trade agenda that he's trying to graft onto every trade agreement that he touches, such as gender issues and labor code issues. But Chinese officials are out there saying, look, we're not going to adopt the Canadian labor code that says you've got to have 4 months of maternity leave. We just don't believe in that. Well, guess what? Neither does the United States, and we have a trade deal with them. I'm not saying that the United States and China are on an even footing, but if Justin Trudeau thinks that the best way to do trade is make everyone adopt Canadian law, well, he's in for a rude awakening, and maybe that's why NAFTA talks and TPP talks aren't going so well.
Now, speaking of which, with Trudeau in Beijing, Japanese leaders in Tokyo are wondering where Canada stands with the TPP. Now, remember, this is supposed to be the trading bloc that Canada would join to counter the Chinese dominance in the region and the marketplace. So what are you hearing?
Well, the Chinese officials are quite nervous is what we're hearing, because this was designed by China or by Japan originally to say, you know what? Let's get a trading bloc going among Pacific Rim countries, of which Canada's one, but we weren't originally at the table. But let's start getting a trading bloc going to try and counter Chinese dominance in the region. So they got Australia on board, they got Myanmar, or not Myanmar, Brunei, Vietnam, other countries, and it grew and it grew. The United States was on board. Barack Obama backed this trade deal. Stephen Harper backed it for the Canadians and, in fact, agreed to some concessions on Canada's part to get in as part of the deal, because this will be a massive trading bloc with favored access for Canadian exports. So he said, all right, well, we'll give up some things in order to get a deal. Justin Trudeau was, after the U.S. pulled out, they did some tweaking. And you remember a few weeks ago we were discussing how he was supposed to show up for a signing ceremony and didn't. A lot of the talk then was, did he scupper that deal to gain favor with China? If he did, that was a bad play on his part, because it didn't get him any favors when he went to Beijing. And now he's got nervous partners in Japan as well. Japan is the largest economy in the TPP. Canada would be second. We would have access to all kinds of markets we don't have favored access to now. They want us as part of the deal. But Justin Trudeau he's got 3 big trade deals on the go right now, and he really is messing up all 3 of them.
Wow. Now, speaking of which, NAFTA talks are about to begin in Montreal next month. Our lead negotiator is out talking to the media about the proposals that Canadians find unacceptable. Now, Brian, what are some of those proposals, and is it true that the Americans are getting frustrated with the entire process?
What the feedback that I'm getting from people that are close to the American negotiators is that, yeah, they are getting frustrated because they'll put out a proposal. To give an example, they want on automotive parts to be considered a North American-made car. Right now, Hal, you only need, I believe it's 62.5% of the components to be made in Canada, the U.S., or Mexico, and then it's a North American car under NAFTA. The Americans want to move that up to about 85%,
Wow.
which is a big jump. Okay, so that means more jobs for North American plants.
Mhm.
But they also say, but 50% of that should be American parts. And the Canadians, from what I'm being told, aren't trying to negotiate and say, okay, well, what about 42 or what about 45? Let's try and find some difference here. Of course, the Americans are the largest market, they're the largest manufacturer. They are going to have the biggest chunk of this. Let's not make any mistakes about that. So, do you negotiate back and forth the way you do when you go to buy your own car? And what I'm hearing is that the Canadian negotiators just say, no, that's a non starter. And that's their position on just about everything. So the Americans are being frustrated, saying, okay, we've put forward a position. What's yours other than no? And whether it's this or access to poultry and dairy, changes in terms of the dispute resolution mechanism, they're not getting a back and forth. It's not a give and take. The Americans are saying, Canada is simply saying no. That's not how you negotiate with anyone,
Oh, no.
whether it's a trade agreement, unions, your children. It's just, that's how a 3-year-old negotiates, if you remember back to those days, Hal.
Oh, yeah.
No, 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 no. It doesn't work for the 3-year-old. It's not going to work here. So Justin Trudeau could end up scuppering 3 major trade agreements that we either need or have, but we're going to rely on.
Yeah, it's called a counteroffer. I know when I buy a house, you negotiate a house. Okay, let's offer $550, and they want $595, whatever. You go back and forth. Let's get to the table and negotiate in good faith, right?
Yeah, and what I'm being told is they're just not negotiating at all.
Wow, that's too bad. Now, speaking of big bucks, Federal Finance Minister Bill Morneau is still on the hot seat, and he's still threatening to sue people. He's given us assurances he's done absolutely nothing wrong, but the Ethics Commissioner still wants to talk with him.
Yeah, well, since we spoke last, it was revealed that his father had also sold off a bunch of shares in MORNEAU Chappelle, and the opposition was rightly saying, hey, wait a minute, your father sold off those shares in MORNEAU Chappelle just a week before you made the tax announcement. This looks suspicious. Can you assure us you didn't talk to your father about this? That should have been a stand up and say, absolutely not, I didn't. But MORNEAU would not do that. This guy doesn't know how to do crisis communications. Instead, he threatens to sue people on a day when he wouldn't have even been in the newscast. He threatened to sue people. When asked about his father, he says, how dare you ask me about my father? Well, because he's on the insider's reports for MORNEAU Chappelle, and some enterprising reporter just happened to look it up and say, hey, wait a minute, there's only one insider at that company that sold off a big chunk of shares just before the tax changes. And he's the father and business partner of the finance minister. Is that a coincidence? It's a fair question. Morneau should have just stood up and answered it right away. Instead, he reached for the smelling salts. He feigned high dudgeon. He complained that they were asking about his family. And then eventually did say, no, of course, I never talked about the tax changes or the timing of the tax changes with my father, but everybody across Canada knew they were coming, which is true. And that could be a defense for the Liberals. The sticking point is nobody knew the timing of when they were coming. And Bill Morneau and his dad, just within a week of those tax changes being introduced, sold off a bunch of shares, took the write down on their shares, and saved on the tax increase that was coming up on January 1st. So that's what the ethics commissioner wants to talk to him about now, is saying, okay, I think you do have to answer some questions about these share sell-offs, and you owe me some answers. He hasn't given many answers to the media, the opposition, or the Canadian public. Maybe he'll give them to Mary Dawson.
Another story we had here at Bridge City News, a new poll done by ECO says 69% of Canadians support banning guns in urban areas. But that support is only at 48% here in Alberta, about 76% in Quebec. The government wants new gun control legislation. But Brian, would it really end the gun violence in our country? I mean, it's not as bad as in the United States, right?
No, not at all. And look, we had little over 600 murders last year straight across Canada. And for the first time since 2012, homicides with firearms outpaced homicides with knives. Normally, and often by a wide margin, knives, stabbings are the number one method used in a murder. In this current context, it was about 224 murders with guns. So that was a big jump. A couple of years ago, it was only 134. So a big jump, absolutely. But you talk to Stats Canada, who's behind those murders? Well, at least half of them, or about half of them, Stats Canada will tell you, are gang-related murders. These are people using illegal guns, settling scores, protecting their drug turf. And guess what? The rise in homicides with firearms is directly correlated to, we can't say it's causation yet, but there is a correlation between the rise in homicides with firearms and increase in shootings in major centers across the country and the opioid crisis. And I was just speaking to an Ottawa police official earlier today who said, you know what, Brian, that's absolutely right. They go hand in hand because these are people protecting their stash, they're protecting their turf, and these guys have never made so much money because opioids like fentanyl are so incredibly lucrative and successful for them that they're willing to do whatever it takes. And so I know here in Ottawa, we saw a big spike last year in terms of shootings. We saw a big spike in homicides. Almost all of them were gang related. I think what this poll really tells you, Hal, whether you're talking about the 48% in Alberta or the 76% in Quebec, people want the gun crime to stop. But you know what? Taking away a pistol, a target pistol, or a hunting rifle from your neighbor, that's not going to stop the guys that are shooting each other over their fentanyl.
Now, the fight for injured vets to get lifelong pensions back hit a bit of a snag in a BC court when an appeals court shut down an attempt to do this through the courts. Tell me more.
Yeah, so this has been going on for a little while, and veterans had been hoping that they could get through the courts what they couldn't get through Parliament. This goes back to about 2005, and I remember being in the House of Commons for this passing, and everyone thought they were doing the right thing. They brought in the new Veterans Charter. The Liberals were still in charge, but they had the full backing of the Conservatives, of the NDP, of the Bloc Québécois. And guess what? They actually did what the veterans asked them to do. The new class of veterans, the new age of veterans coming out of Afghanistan, who said, you know what? We don't need these lifelong pensions anymore. Give us a lump sum payout. We can do better. We can do this. Well, it turns out an awful lot of the guys couldn't look after the money. You get $250,000 and you are young and you've lost a leg and you're on pain medication, you get addicted to opioids. Guess what? All the money's gone and you're not looked after anymore. So it was done with the best of intent. It has been recognized for some time under both Conservatives and Liberals that it's got to change, but it's going to take time. The vets have been hoping that the courts would just flip on this, and the court said, no, not our jurisdiction to do this. This is up to Parliament. We'll see. I'm sure something's going to come out. And for the longest time, Veterans Affairs was the least partisan file. That took a bit of a turn towards the end of the Harper administration, especially with Julian Fantino in there and the opposition critics that were after him. But, blame on all sides there. But let's hope it goes back to everyone just trying to say, okay, what's the best thing for the veterans? Because I can tell you that was the intent back in 2005 when they went to this system. They're in the process of trying to change it. Let's hope that current Veterans Affairs Minister Seamus O'Regan gets it right.
Now, the Canada Revenue Agency is in a fight over a diabetes tax credit since the agency denied most claims. Tell me more.
Yeah, but if you feel like they're coming after you on small business tax changes or your danger pay for being in the military or your discount for your chicken salad or your pair of jeans, you might be right because they're also going after diabetics. So there's a disability tax credit, and diabetics can apply for this and get it if they spend 14 hours or more a week looking after managing their diabetes, doing tests, blood sugar tests, administering insulin, and there's definite criteria on this. Well, the CRA had been denying, it was between 80 and 90% of claims, and the Diabetes Association said, wait a minute here. It used to be that if the doctor signed off on this, that it was fine. CRA said, oh, no, it's misunderstanding. Sorry, the government was backpedaling, saying, no, we're not going after diabetics. Well, guess what? Access to information can show an awful lot of things. And the Diabetes Foundation got their hands on a memo saying most adult diabetics don't need this 14 hours. They can do it with less. And they're saying, look, this is the proof that they were looking to deny us all along. And so I think they've got another case on their desks that they really just want to get rid of quickly.
Wow, it's incredible. Our Bridge City News contributor, Brian Lilley, joining me once again from Ottawa today. Brian, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Hal.